Members of the media, the listening and viewing audience in Trinidad and Tobago, those joining us on the World Wide Web, as well as to my colleagues, MP Nayan Gatsby Dolly, as well as Senator Vishnu Dan Paul, who will join us today to discuss matters concerning CEPEP, as well as issues concerning finance and the economy. And I am also going to touch on some issues that are in the public domain with respect to the operations of the Water and Sewerage Authority, as well as crime and security, the state of crime and security in Trinidad and Tobago. So first, I will start by indicating to all of us and to the country that the leader of the opposition has asked us to host this press conference despite the fact that she's out of the country, because we committed to having this weekly press conference so that the official opposition in Trinidad and Tobago can lend its voice and put its voice with respect to serious national issues in Trinidad and Tobago, and to open ourselves for examination by the media and by extension the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The leader of the opposition is attending some meetings with the diaspora in New York, as well as to, she's also attending some personal issues, and she is expected to be back in the country next Monday, where she is looking forward to engaging the people of Trinidad and Tobago on, doing the normal campaign walks, not campaign, but walks in communities, reaching out to our constituents all over Trinidad and Tobago, executives. And so she's actually looking forward to being back next Monday so that she can continue her job as the leader of the opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, you would recall at our last press conference, I made reference to certain statements made by the Minister of Public Utilities during the debate on the midterm review with respect to some of the operations of the Water and Sewerage Authority. And during his contribution, the minister indicated that the Water and Sewerage Authority, under the direction of the then minister, Marvin Gonzalez, rented a building in Port of Spain for a whopping sum of $3 million. And that was an indication, according to him, of a slush fund being operated by the Water and Sewerage Authority. I investigated the matter myself, and I asked for documentation within the authority and the ministry to verify what the minister is saying and whether it is true and whether it is false, and how I can respond to that, because of course at that point in time I didn't have the information that was available to me to be able to respond, especially taking into consideration that the minister responded to my contribution in the parliament, so I didn't have the opportunity to respond to what he was saying. Suffice it to say that a couple of days after, I investigated the matter and realized that the allegation made by the minister had absolutely no truth to it. And what I did in response to that is that I wrote and I invoked the appropriate standing orders of the parliament so that the minister could be held to account for the the falsity that he would have stated on the floor of the parliament and misleading the parliament and by extension the country. I was not lucky, if I am to refer to it in that way, but despite the chief whip invoking the appropriate standing order, the minister was not asked to account, to correct what he is saying. And that was the end of the matter where the parliament is concerned. So it forced me at our last press conference to disclose to the media the lease document that WASA entered into with a property developer, where in fact the property was rented for $14,000 a month and not $3 million as stated by the Honorable Minister. And it was, my understanding was a 24-month lease of a building in Port of Spain that was utilized to spearhead the transformation of the authority. The media reached out to the minister and asked him to comment on this disclosure that was made and whether or not he was prepared to continue to stand by this outrageous lie to the parliament. And interestingly, I observed the minister saying he did not respond to the document that was produced to him by the Trinidad Express. And he went on to double down on another piece of allegation that he made in the parliament. So he did not respond to the information that was placed to demonstrate the diabolical lie that he would have placed on the floor of the parliament, but he was allowed to go on to make another allegation, to pivot with another allegation and say that MP Gonzalez should speak to the over $25 million in contracts awarded to another contractor by the name of Oppostion under his watch at WASA. And he should explain how a campaign manager and a sub-agent for his general election advertised to the public by the EBC walked away with a sole select contract days before the election. And I'm quoting what the Express reported when the minister was asked to explain in light of evidence presented that what he said in the parliament was in fact a lie. And he pivoted with this allegation and basically doubled down because he, again, utilizing the cover of parliament to make wild allegation to mislead the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And as opposed to dealing with the issue that was posed to him by the Express, the question that was posed to him by the Express, based on what I disclosed to you members of the media and to the country, he pivoted away with an allegation that he started in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I don't rush to respond. I like to do my own investigation and get the facts and report to you, the country, of the facts, because I want you, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that the UNC intends to govern with lies because they campaign on lies. And I will say it over and over again. They campaign on lies and they intend to govern with lies. So what are the facts with respect to this allegation? I received 2 documents from the Water and Sewage Authority. And the first document is dated February the 17th, 2025. And I will make this document available to all members of the media. And the document is headed Technology, Future Systems and Sustainability Quality Control Department Analytical Report, which speaks to an issue in a community by the name of Salazar Trace in Point Fortin. And it was discovered that the water in Salazar Trace in Point Fortin was so contaminated that it exposed the health of the customers in that community. And I will quote a part of that document or report that was compiled by senior managers within the Water and Sewage Authority. Remarks: physical, chemical. The water sample taken from the washout at Salazar Trace off South Central Road, Tiche, Point Fortin, did not meet the World Health Authority or organization's drinking water guidelines for color, turbidity, residual free chlorine, total iron, and manganese. The water sample taken from the PSP at LP68, Lampool 68, Salazar Trace, off South Central Road, Tiche, Point Fortin, did not meet the WHO drinking water guidelines for color, turbidity, residual, free chlorine, total iron, and manganese. The water sample taken from Light Pole 202, Salazar Trace, off South Central Road, Tiche, Point Fortin, did not meet the WHO drinking water guidelines for color, turbidity, residual free chlorine, and total iron. And bacteriological report. The water sample taken from the washout at Salazar Trace off South Central Road, Tiche, Point Fortin, was bacteriologically unsafe. The water sample taken at the same location was bacteriologically unsafe. Another location on the same road. And the water taken from LP 202 Salazar Trace, South Central Road, Tiche, Point Fortin, again, was bacteriologically unsafe. 3 different points, water samples were taken, and the evidence suggested, the scientific evidence suggested that the water sample was bacteriologically unsafe. It is a report dated 17th of February, 2025. When the report was submitted, a recommendation was made that in order to remove the possibility of members of that community, residents of that community, their health being further exposed by unsafe water conditions in that community, that immediate and emergency tender process should be initiated so as to get a contractor to replace those pipelines with immediate effect. So, via a report dated March 2025, and I will read the end of that report because I will circulate the entire document to the media. WASA recommended, the managers of WASA recommended that a company by the name of Oppostion Construction Limited was selected based on their ability to mobilize, going through their own tender process for emergency tender, that the contractor was selected based on their ability to mobilize within the shortest possible time, as all major contractors are presently engaged in contracts for the authority and have stated that their inability to meet the required time frame and capabilities needed based on the emergency requirement of this job. That is in March 2025. And the contractor was hired to replace the pipeline because of this unsafe drinking water in the Tiche Point Fortin community. Ladies and gentlemen, the minister gave the impression that this had something to do with the general election of April the 28th. I am certain that the minister has in his possession these documents that I'm reading to you. And if he does not, then perhaps someone within the authority is misleading the minister. Because had the minister read those documents, he would realize that the genesis of this matter had absolutely nothing to do with any general election on April the 28th. Because it all started in January and February when no one knew that there was going to be an election on April the 28th. And everyone knew at that point in time that WASA was engaged in a number of pipeline replacement projects all over the country, that contractors were engaged, and they contacted numerous contractors who indicated that they could not have replaced the pipeline within the timeline given because of the emergency situation, and they came down, go through their tender process, recommended a contractor outside, because the general election, when I checked the date, the general election was called, I think, on March the 17th or March the 18th, somewhere thereabouts. These documents that I am just presenting to you, that I've just read for, have their genesis outside of any general election in Trinidad and Tobago. And I am further told that when the contractor was hired, even today, the contractor has not been paid $1. Even though the contractor would have expended out of pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace the pipeline and has not been paid $1 for this project. And yet still, the minister and his minions repeating over and over again that this contractor received a contract on the eve of a general election worth $3 million, and somehow this contractor was given that because it is directly related to the general election of April the 20th. Nothing is further from the truth. And if the minister does not have the documents that I've just read to you, which clearly shows that this matter is a serious matter and was a serious matter, facing hundreds or perhaps thousands of customers in Point Fortin, and you would see from the report that I've shared the quality and the color of the water, and the fact that the authority operated with dispatch in the best interest of its customers, because had it not done so, the authority could have been held liable because people's lives could have been impacted. The minister, I am certain, had access to the documents, these documents that I've just read. In the same way, I believe he had access to the leases concerning the property that I referred to in my last news conference that indicated to him that as opposed to $3 million, the property was in fact rented for $14,000 a month. And I'm also certain that he has in his possession these documents to show that this matter had absolutely nothing to do with any general elections in Trinidad and Tobago. And what do you expect an authority to do when reports of this nature are presented to it? This is a regular thing that happens. It must and it is expected to operate in dispatch in order to deal with those matters. And therefore, I am saying, members of the media, that anything that comes from the mouth of this minister and his colleagues in the government should be examined carefully, because they campaign on lies and they intend to govern with lies. Another issue I wish to raise is the issue of crime. As you know, that this government has campaigned for the last 9 years or so on the issue of crime. They have called for the resignation of my former colleague, Minister Hines, on numerous occasions, offering his head as some panacea to solving crime in Trinidad and Tobago. They have not cooperated with the government on a number of initiatives, legislative interventions in the parliament. And I recall that the former prime minister, he reached out to the then leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, who is now the prime minister, and asked for bilateral discussion to take place between the government, the then government, and the opposition so that we can deal with the issue of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Up to now, she has not responded, because we always believe that the UNC held the position that if crime is used as a political weapon against the PNM in a strategic way, then politically it can get the PNM out of office and they can assume governance in Trinidad and Tobago based on the issue of crime. And that's the reason why we never had any cooperation on serious issues with respect to crime on the floor of parliament from the then opposition that is now leading Trinidad and Tobago. But they campaigned on the issue of crime for 9 years, ladies and gentlemen. And you would expect that, having now been placed in the driver's seat to manage this country and having campaigned on the issue of crime, that the government will have policies and programs to immediately deal and tackle the issue of crime. And so serious were they recruited someone who was a senior police officer. I think his rank was a superintendent or a senior superintendent. And that perhaps assumed that the government wanted someone to go into the Ministry of National Security, no Homeland Security, so that he can immediately tackle this very pervasive issue that, that has been around us for well over 2 decades in Trinidad and Tobago. The comments of the Minister of Homeland Security since assuming office is one that should concern not only us in the opposition, but every right-thinking citizen in Trinidad and Tobago. And you do not have to take my words for it. I'm going to read some excerpts of the minister when he is rightly asked about his reaction to the upsurge in crime that we are witnessing over the last 3 weeks. Asked by the Express newspaper what was being done to address murders in the country, Alexander said, as the Minister of Homeland Security, said, and I quote, "This is probably a question that you have to ask the Commissioner of Police. My responsibility as the line minister is to provide him with as much resources, technical resources, manpower resources, vehicles, etc., to put on the ground." So in other words, he said, "Well, ask me." Asked the Commissioner of Police. Now this, I recall former Minister Fitzgerald Hines on a Morning Edition program making a similar statement, and he was attacked all over the country, especially by the opposition, for making a similar statement. And today, a political party that campaigned on the issue of crime and security in Trinidad and Tobago now has, leading the charge at the Ministry of Homeland Security, someone who is saying, "Don't ask me, ask the commissioner." In other interviews, he said, "Be patient, hold strain." This is what he's telling citizens. A party that campaigned for 9 years, you would never believe that a party that campaigned, and rightly so, on the issue of crime and security in Trinidad and Tobago now has, leading its charge, someone who is telling the population, hold strain. And I continue. On Monday gone, he was on the Morning Edition show being interviewed by the host. And I quote some of the things that he said. "We are looking at measures that will have an immediate impact. You will see, and you will not hear. You will see. You will see what we intend to do." This is the Minister of Homeland Security. "You will see what we intend to do with respect to guns, to the extent at which you, Mr. Hutchinson, will say, 'My God, for real?'" This is the minister. This is the minister. Then he said that, "I know the population," this is the minister saying, he said, "I know the population is waiting and want to see an immediate impact. But let me not throw the blame on anyone. What we met is institutions," this is the minister, "what we met is institutions filled with emptiness, lack of vision and thought. We have to reconstruct every institution under national security apparatus. It takes time to do these things. When you think you was going in," and of course I can't talk like him, but I will try my best. "It takes time to do these things. When you think you was going into and jump into the immediate fight against crime and cause that immediate impact, we met emptiness." The Minister of Homeland Security is saying, when we thought that we were going in and to cause an immediate impact, what we met is emptiness. He is now saying that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that he was part of is emptiness. The intelligence agencies of this country are emptiness. The Trinidad and Tobago Prison Service is empty. And all of the arms of national security that he now is leading is empty. And I want to say to the minister that perhaps you bite more than you could chew, and you are now choking politically. But as a minister, you must first recognize that all institutions and organizations may not always have all of the resources that they need and that they want. But you lead in such a way that you give them the support so that they can manage and manage effectively and efficiently. And the last thing you would want to tell the country and the world that what you have inherited is emptiness, because I can tell you that there's no truth to it. In all of these organizations, despite their challenges, you have men and women who are capable of doing the work. So I reject out of hand that what you have inherited is emptiness. You are just looking for excuses because the transition for you obviously is very difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say on this point that it is clear that the UNC has not prepared itself for governance in Trinidad and Tobago. They fooled the population by first being obstructionists, and then they offered cheap, empty slogans and taglines and built an army of hate against the previous PNM government and hoped that was enough to get them in government. And now that they're in government is water more than flour. They do not know if to turn left. They do not know if to turn right. And their nakedness is now exposed for all to see. I want to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the government is now in charge. And the UNC is now in charge. And the utterances of their Minister of Homeland Security is causing more fear in the country than crime itself. The utterances of the Minister of Homeland Security is causing more fear and driving more fear in the national psyche than crime itself. And I want to tell the minister, Honorable Minister, this is not the Crime Watch show. Honorable Minister, this is not the Beyond the Tape show. You cannot cycle your way out of this. You cannot hand wrestle your way out of this by distraction. This is the real show. And now it's time to show your capacity to fix the problem. And telling the country to wait and have patience is not going to help. This is the real show. And the country awaits the delivery of a clear policy by this government to deal with the crime situation, because you had 9 years to prepare yourself for this. Thank you. So I wish to invite my colleague, the Honorable Dr. Nayan Gatsby-Dolly, who will offer some comments on the issue of CEPEP and how this issue is impacting the most vulnerable citizens in our country. I thank you.
Good morning to the members of the media, our listeners, our viewers. This morning, I want to deal with the social crisis that has been created by the UNC based on their decision to fire more than 20,000 persons in this country in as little as 7 weeks. 14,000 of those being the most vulnerable people who have benefited over the years from the CEPEP and the forestry programs. And I say social crisis, and this is not an exaggeration nor a stretch. I am a member of parliament. I've been a member of parliament for the last 10 years. And I sit in the parliament now on the side of the opposition, but I face a battery of members of parliament who now sit in the government. And the question I have for those members of parliament, we took an oath to represent people. And I wonder, when the decision was made to fire over 14,000 of the most vulnerable of those people all over the country, because just like I have some in St. Anne's East, MP Gonzalez has some, and every member of the opposition has, and the government on the other side. And when that decision was taken, I wonder, as a representative, what was the input to ensure that the most vulnerable who would have been affected by that political decision were taken care of? The grass is growing all around the country, but while the grass is growing, our people are starving. And I say starving, again, not a stretch. The CEPEP workers were paid their last, what is to be their last salary on Monday. And it was late because it should have been last Friday. And if some of us are not acquainted with the circumstances and the realities, let me add some context. Many of our CEPEP and our forestry workers live day to day. They, in some cases, borrow money or trust items to be able to live. They live paycheck to paycheck. And so when one paycheck comes, in many cases, that is already spent. So having been paid on Monday, and that would be their last paycheck, the question is, how are these workers now, thousands of workers, which represent families, which represent children, many of them school-age children, how are they now in reality to be able to afford to deal with the back-to-school expenses, the vacation expenses? How are they in reality to do that? This opposition has been raising this social issue time and time again, and the response from the government has not been encouraging. It is clear that the government made this move with no plan to take care of the vulnerable who have been exposed now to the elements. Women without options are vulnerable women. Men without options are desperate people. These persons have dependents that have not been catered for. I want to indicate that we as the opposition looked carefully at the release made by Minister Vandana Mohit, and we received no comfort at all, because in the most clinical, uncaring and cold manner, the CEPEP workers were told that you can call a toll-free number and we will take care of you. And we have spoken to our persons in our communities, and they have received no comfort or help from the Ministry of the People. And we are very concerned about this social crisis. People without options get desperate and make decisions that are not always in their best interest. And we are concerned about the children and the impact on the dropout rate, the impact on gangs, because vulnerable children are good fodder for gang warfare and for recruitment. And we are concerned about that in our communities, because we understand that for many of these children, education is their way out. But if they are not given the chance because their parents are disadvantaged, then we are very concerned about the social impact now and in the future of this capricious political decision, because we know that this could have been handled differently. Minister Padarat is on record as showing what happened in 2017 when transitions were made for contractors. Note that the PNM took office in 2015, and 2 years later, the PNM was still in the transition mode. So therefore, this situation that has been precipitated by the action of the UNC has not been done before in this country. No government has been so capricious, so callous as to fire so many people at one time. How is the system going to absorb these people? What are they going to do, and what are their options? And we want to say to all of the displaced and carelessly fired workers that there are provisions of the government that can help you in this time. And even though the government itself, who has campaigned on love and campaigned on caring for children, has not reached out to you, we, the opposition, want to make you aware today of what you are legally entitled to under the Public Assistance Act. We want our CEPEP, our forestry and other fired workers to understand that there are grants which have been put in place to assist you. And even though the government is not making this clear to you, we, the opposition, as a responsible opposition, who always puts the information in the public domain to help our people, we want you to know. Being knowledgeable will help you at this time. So we want our fired CEPEP and forestry workers to know that there are grants that you should be applying for at this time, and we want you to access the offices of social development, Ministry of the People and Social Development, to access and apply for these grants. The temporary food card, that is emergency food support for households without income, that is available, and we ask you to visit the offices and we will tell you where they are and apply for that. The permanent food support, monthly food allowance based on family size, you can apply for that as well. The public assistance grant, which gives you financial aid for families under the poverty line, you have no income and you should be applying for that at this time. Rental assistance, which affords you a rent of up to $2,500 a month for 3 months. You should be applying for that. There's a dietary grant, which is up to $1,500 for persons with specific health-related dietary needs. The pharmaceutical grant, up to $2,500 for drugs not provided under CEDAP. The education grant, $500 per month per child attending secondary school where the household has no other income source. The school supplies grant, a support for students attending primary schools to cover books, uniforms, and related materials. The PNM is calling on every displaced CEPEP and forestry worker to take immediate steps to safeguard your families. The government, which should be doing this for you and should be helping, is not helping you to help yourselves. And we, the PNM, as a responsible opposition that cares, is now putting it before you so that you can take immediate action to safeguard your family. There are provisions of the state to assist you in doing that. Visit your local board office. Apply for these grants. We are asking all of those CEPEP workers, go to those offices, apply for those grants, and demand your legal right for support under Section 9 and Section 10 of the Public Assistance Act. Do it now, before the September term begins. Do it now. Go now. Take action to safeguard yourself and your family. These offices are located all around the country. There's an office in Port of Spain, Tunapuna, Caroni, that's the Shoguna's office located in Caroni, San Fernando, Aranguez, Rio Claro, Point Fortin, Princestown, Pinal, Sandy Grande, and Tobago. So there are offices all over the country, and we will put up, each member of parliament of the opposition will put up the location of these offices so that the CEPEP and forestry workers who have been affected by this capricious, callous action, political action of the government can access these services. Go to these offices, apply for these grants, and take action to safeguard yourself and your family. It is important that all of our CEPEP and forestry workers understand that silence is not an option. Silence is not an option at this time. And we call on you to visit these offices and demand what is your right under the law. The dismantling of these programs was done clearly without a plan, but the state has resources that can help you, your families, and especially your children. So we and the PNM, even as we fight the legal battles in the court, we understand that there is a social crisis looming, and we are working with you to ensure that you have the information that will allow you to have a fighting chance and to give your children a fighting chance against the wickedness, the capriciousness of this UNC government. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Vishnu Danpur. I'm a opposition senator. Firstly, let me just start by saying I'm not here to criticize the Minister of Finance or criticize anyone. I'm here to present facts based on figures, to present some analysis, and for the population to judge for themselves. In I believe it was the first post-cabinet media briefing on, let me see, on 8th of May, the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, outlined government's plans to address the financial deficits. And she pointed out at that time that Trinidad and Tobago for the month of May has a cash deficit of $4 billion. And the government was operating on fumes. And she made some proposals. She outlined some proposals to address the deficit as follows: a drawdown of the remaining 2.7 billion available in the overdraft facility at the central bank, refinance a minimum of 60% of treasury bills during May, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund available balance of 1.7 billion to be drawn down for the rest of fiscal 2025, and undertake additional borrowing of 1 billion. Based on a urgent question in Parliament recently, we found out that the government borrowed $2 billion in May. Now, the Minister of Finance would have understood, and I'm sure the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance would have explained to him that May, the month of May in any year, in the Ministry of Finance is usually considered a dry revenue month. The technocrats would have told the Minister of Finance that corporation taxes are collected quarterly. Royalties are collected by the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries 2 weeks after the end of a quarter. PAYE is collected on the 15th of each month. VAT is collected on the 25th of each month. So May, unfortunately for the Minister of Finance, and obviously he had no other choice but to use me, is what a bad month for a random selection. Okay. So what that pointed out to me, if I had $2.7 billion available in the overdraft, and I had the headroom on the treasury bills, and I had $1.7 billion for the rest of fiscal 2025 from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and I still had the headroom to borrow $2 billion, there's no way I would consider economy running on fumes or even close to crashing, as mentioned previously by the Minister of Finance. But what was presented by the Honorable Prime Minister at that time may not have been a totally accurate position of the financial state of the economy. In that, there's something I like to describe as an elephant in the room called the overdraft facility at the central bank, in conjunction or together with the Exchequer One account and government cash balances at the central bank. The overdraft for the central bank, and I'll say this without fear, the overdraft for the central bank stifles fiscal policy in Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, you are limited by the type of fiscal policy that you could implement by the level of the overdraft facility. And what exacerbated the issue is that since 2009, this country, regardless of the administration, whether it's UNC or PNM, since 2009, this country has been recording fiscal deficits. And what that meant is that these fiscal deficits were building up in the Exchequer One account, and the Exchequer One account at the central bank was not being repaid. At the end of May this year, the Exchequer One account at the central bank stood at $50 billion. In other words, for you to have access to any of the other funds in the government cash balances at the central bank, for instance, and this was noted by the Auditor General in the latest report. For instance, there are $11 billion in the Green Fund, but you cannot access that because all these funds, like the Green Fund, the Infrastructure Development Fund, etc., with several billions of dollars in them, cannot be accessed because they are essentially mortgaged to the overdraft facility at the central bank. The only way you can get out of that stifling overdraft as far as fiscal policy is concerned is to record fiscal surpluses so you can pay back the central bank and pay back the exchequer account. So that's the first piece of advice I would give the Minister of Finance. But over the years, it has become exceedingly difficult to run fiscal surpluses because every month before this country earns $1 of income, every month, the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance know that they face a bill, an expenditure bill of mandatory expenditure of $4.5 billion on average. Sometimes the figure will be higher, sometimes it will be lower. But let me tell you why any right-thinking Minister of Finance would not interfere with mandatory expenditure when you see how it's categorized. And I repeat, any right-thinking Minister of Finance would not interfere with old age pension and all these direct charges on the exchequer. He would not interfere with personal expenditure, of course. And if you increase the wage rate, if you increase the level of personal expenditure, this just adds to the problem. Inside of there will also be senior citizen grant, the public assistance grant, the disability grant, some capital programs, funding for the THA, funding for statutory boards, etc., even operating the inter-island ferry, UE. So you don't want to interfere with what we describe as mandatory expenditure. And if mandatory expenditure averages about $4.5 billion a month, and you do the quick mathematics, that's roughly 54 billion at 4.5, and your total expenditure for the year is 60 billion, you don't have a lot of leverage for discretionary expenditure. So the Minister of Finance finds himself in a bit of a bind as far as that is concerned, and you can't fault him for that. So I just want to address quickly this concern that the economy crashed. And I don't agree with that assertion at all, in that I'm an opposition senator. And there's no way I'm going to bad talk, or as we say in Trinidad, or I'm going to paint the country in a bad light. Let me tell you why. Because when you say negative things about the economy, you have to respond to the credit rating agencies. You have to respond to the IMF, okay? And they're gonna be listening. And I can assure you, even though I'm an opposition senator, you're not going to be hearing anything being said bad about the economy from me. So the minister, after in the media review, broke down his budget now, his supplemental budget, and arrived at a $9.6 billion deficit. There was no mention of how he is going to finance that deficit. And again, I am staying away from the old talk about where we find the money and all. I am assuming, and I think it's a good assumption, that the minister knows where to find the money. Because he says that he's going to be borrowing on the local capital market, as well as drawing down on existing multilateral facilities. At the time the assumption that used in the media review was an oil price of $66 and a gas price of $5. Today, the oil price is just under $66 US dollars per barrel, and the gas price is about, when I checked, it was about 3.5 US dollars per MMBTU. And just to give the minister some ideas of how we could find the money to do it, there's a significant amount of headroom on the Development Loans Act, headroom on the external. Then he can also use the overdraft facility at the central bank again, depending on what it stands right now. He can use the HSF, but he has to be very careful, because I can tell you from my experience, when these credit rating agencies review your economy and how your economy is reacting to exogenous factors, especially, and you're downgraded, it's the most difficult thing to do. I have learned the hard way, is to be upgraded. It's exceedingly a difficult task. But just to come back on the economy crash, I just want to use two pieces of information that I have to show that on June 17th, the Trinidad Generation Unlimited raised US $525 million. June 17th this year, sorry. You raised US $525 million on the external market. And I quote from the Trinidad Express. For the first time in nearly a decade, Trinidad Generation Unlimited had returned to the international bond market, raising US $525 million to help refinance its existing debt and improve its financial footing. The bond issue was 3 times oversubscribed. Now, if you're a potential bondholder or you are a potential institutional investor, you are not going to invest in any bond from any state enterprises from any country that the economy crashed. Okay? And the rating on this bond, as usually done, the rating is usually 1 notch below the sovereign rating. Okay? The rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Fitch, both gave the new bond BB ratings, with Standard & Poor's noting that the deal would improve the company's cash flow and liquidity. This would not happen in a crash economy. I'm just going to use one piece of data also from the central bank, and it's a piece of data that I think should be used more regularly to indicate that the economy is performing well. And that metric is the credit to the private sector. In 2022, credit to the private sector was stood at $66 billion. In 2023, $71 billion. In 2024, $78 billion. And as at April 2025, it stood at $80 billion. What that means is that there's a significant amount of people having a lot of faith in the economy and having and thinking to themselves, well, listen, I feel like I can invest in this economy, because these numbers, these figures include consumers, businesses, large and small, etc. So I just like to stay away from that term that the economy crashed. I absolutely don't agree with it. So for the future, I just like to take a look at a bit on the foreign exchange situation. And just one example of what could be done. It's nothing new, but in 2013, myself and then Minister Hawaii, now Governor Hawaii, so he's very familiar with it, thought about introducing, when we issued a bond, and that was 11 times oversubscribed. At that time, it was December 2013. And we issued a bond And we were thinking about hiving off piece of that bond for the diaspora, meaning that give the diaspora an opportunity to feel as though they belong to the country, essentially. Get them feel of patriotism. And this time, and so as I said, there's nothing new about it. But let me tell you the catch as far as foreign exchange is concerned. There's a significantly large diaspora, Trinidad and Tobago diaspora out there. As you know, the destinations, New York, Toronto, etc., London, Miami. And we are very notorious, this country, for not receiving remittances from our diaspora. So if you get the diaspora involved in a bond issue and get them involved in a level of patriotism, there are countries in the Caribbean, Haiti, Jamaica, Guyana, all right? I mean a country like India, where the remittances contribute almost 25% of their GDP. It's something that we need to look at. So that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice, and this is to do with debt management, is that, and it was glossed over recently, I read it somewhere in the newspaper, that the Barbadian government is about to engage in some debt swap deals guaranteed by four, and they didn't mention the four development banks, but the Barbadian government plus 3 other Caribbean countries about to engage, and they didn't mention the countries neither, in this debt swap deal. Let me tell you about how this debt swap deal sounds interesting. Is that what the country will do is buy back their expensive debt, okay? Sell it back onto the market for a cheaper interest rate, but that cheaper interest rate now is guaranteed by the 4 development banks, okay? And now that you have that fiscal space, because you're paying less debt, you can use that fiscal space for national security, health, wherever, education, and your debt becomes much cheaper. Now, I don't know the mechanics of it yet. It's been worked out. I'm assuming the Barbadian government is going to be the pilot of the project, but I am thinking that I see no reason why the Trinidad and Tobago government cannot see they can get involved in something like that. I think it will only redound to the benefit of the fiscal account. Another piece of advice, and this is a very difficult thing to tell a Minister of Finance, especially when you're dealing with, as I said, exogenous factors like the price of oil and gas, and you're dealing with declining production on both oil and gas, is to run a fiscal surplus to try and pay down the exchequer account at the central bank. That is not an easy thing to do. I worked with 8 ministers of finance, and it's a very tough decision to make, especially when you know you are going to have to adjust mandatory expenditure. And no, as I said previously, no right-thinking minister of finance is going to take that chance. But sometimes you have to make unpopular decisions. And until we start to record fiscal surpluses, that exchequer account is just going to keep growing and growing. And as I said previously, fiscal policy is going to be stifled by the overdraft facility. I want to speak just a little bit on the TTRA. Last 2 weeks in Parliament, I challenged the Minister of Finance. I put out a challenge to the Minister of Finance. And I said, let us use 2025 as a baseline scenario. Okay, let us use the income collections for 2025 as a baseline scenario. Let the government implement all their structural changes in BIR and customs, all. And I give them 2 consecutive fiscal years, 2026 and 2027, to implement all the measures that they could in BIR and customs. And I am challenging the Minister of Finance to close that $10 billion tax gap, $10 billion tax gap that the Revenue Authority would have been successful in doing. And I also said, if he did that and he closed that tax gap in 2 years, as the Revenue Authority would have, I would go back to the Senate and apologize profusely. And I'm keeping that promise. The final thing I want to mention here is that the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance, in conjunction with the Central Bank, or the Governor of the Central Bank, and as a former Minister of Finance, he'd be very familiar with the issue. I think it's about time that the repo rate, which has stood at 3.5% for the last 5 years, if I'm correct, needs to be adjusted to have some kind of impact on foreign currency deposits, and maybe indirectly, but at least some impact on foreign currency deposits, and as well as to try and adjust what we used to call a long time ago the flight to quality or capital flight. I think that's something that the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank should coordinate and take a look at. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Any questions?
Yes.
It's on. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sankar Samaru, Guardian Media. I want to ask about what would be our front page of the Guardian today with respect to CEPEP contracts, where the lawyers for CEPEP, representing CEPEP, are saying that CEPEP contract renewals were not approved by Cabinet and a file is going to the fraud squad. We'd love some clarity on that. Those contract extensions, the contentious ones right now, they're saying were not approved by Cabinet.
Well, let me see this. As you know, and as the population is aware, this matter is a matter that is already receiving the attention of the court. What transpired yesterday is what normally happens in civil proceedings, where a claim is filed and the court sets deadline for the parties to exchange documents, file affidavits, respond to affidavits, etc. And then the court sits on the scheduled date and determine the matter. What transpired yesterday was that the attorneys for the CEPEP company filed their documents to respond to the claims of the contractors. And whilst they did so, they dumped the same documents in the media because it is their pattern of behavior and their conduct in civil litigation that these matters ought to be ventilated, according to them, in the court of public opinion. The opposition is not going to be baited by UNC operatives by responding to claims and affidavits filed in legal proceedings. This matter is scheduled to be heard on Friday. My understanding is that the claims made by the CEPEP attorneys have been responded to in affidavits filing, and perhaps they should, if that is their business of dumping these matters in the media and seeking to shape public opinion on matters that are engaging the court, then perhaps they should also dump the affidavits filed in response to these claims. The opposition is of the view that this matter is engaging the attention of the courts. We are not prepared to respond to affidavits and evidence and documents filed and placed in the public domain by attorneys representing CEPEP. We await the outcome of the proceedings in the court. So again, on that point, what you have seen in some of the major newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago with respect to cabinet approval is a matter before the court. And we are not going to stand here and respond to something that is engaging the attention of the court. My understanding is that affidavits have been filed to respond to these claims, and we look forward to the court adjudicating on these matters.
All right, let me ask you then, for educational purposes,
Sure.
in general terms then, what about this matter in particular, in general terms? Would something that commands that amount of expenditure require cabinet approval?
Well, I would say that the cabinet is not engaged in a procurement process. the award of contracts to contractors and what have you, the approval for the award of contracts, it is within the sole domain of the board of state agencies as well as the chief procurement officers in the respective state agencies as it relates to, and that is very consistent with the new procurement regime that this country has been operating under over the last 4 years. Cabinet has absolutely no approval whatsoever with respect to approving the award of contracts. With respect to financial matters, you would expect, yes, that the cabinet will approve funding. There might be appropriation and allocation within the respective ministry or state agencies, and the board, having regard to the allocations, will make decisions based on that.
Okay, so just take me through it. CEPEP, I don't think CEPEP generates any revenue, so it will need state funds to as the lifeblood, right? So let's say I'm the chair of CEPEP,
Yes.
and I want to make a decision to extend that, saying, okay, for CEPEP to continue doing its mandate, I need to extend contracts for the next 3 years. That would require some funds.
Board approval.
That would need board approval.
Correct.
But what does cabinet have a role there?
No.
So the board could just,
based on the information and the financial information available to it, in accordance with allocations made under the ministry, under the respective ministry, the board can make that decision.
right. So as chairperson, I can make that decision.
Yes.
But would I still require cabinet approval for the funds, or?
And that is normally will happen with the board discussing these matters with its line ministry. That's what it is. So sometimes you will make a decision over a 3-year period, Akash, and that's what it is. And then you will come to cabinet and you will come to parliament to get the appropriate allocation that will take you towards the end of this period of time, this current fiscal year or the midterm review. And appropriations are made. Sometimes they via money from within heads within the respective line items and ministries and what have you. So these are normal discussions that board and line ministries will normally have. The cabinet will come in at a time when you're preparing the national budget, and the cabinet will decide on what allocation it is going to be making with respect to the ministries, and the ministries working with state agencies under its charge will determine how these finances are going to be allocated.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's in general, so you're not speaking specifically about.
No, that's
as you
generally,
said.
that's how it is.
Because we saw the affidavits this morning of Joel Edwards, the former chair, who said that he asked the CEPEP CEO for a board note for approval for the extensions, and he said they discussed if cabinet approval was needed, but no decision was made on that issue.
Yeah. So I have not read these affidavits. I saw the headlines in the newspapers, and I said I am aware that affidavits were filed in response to these claims by the CEPEP attorneys. But we cannot comment on these matters. These are affidavits being filed in court so that the court can make a determination. I mean, I can stand here as an attorney at law, and I could give my views on these legal arguments, but it's not our responsibility. This is a matter that is engaging the courts, and if attorneys want to, in the conduct of litigation, put these matters in the public domain so as to influence public opinion on matters that are engaging the courts, then it is something that I have a view on as an attorney. I have a specific view on it. I don't think that's the way in which you conduct litigation in Trinidad and Tobago or in any Commonwealth jurisdiction. But I understand that that is the pattern of behavior by some attorneys, that whilst they comply with deadlines to file documents and what have you, they make it available so that it can influence it. They make it available to the media so that it can influence public opinion on very, very serious issues. Our position is that we look forward to the court determining the matter that was filed on Friday.
I want to go to the first thing you would have spoken about, and I want to ask about it. The contractor was Oppostion Construction Limited, right?
Yes, that's the document.
And okay, so I saw in the document you gave the rationale for selecting them in terms of how quickly they could
That's
mobilize. Yeah, WASA.
Me,
Yeah,
yes.
sorry, WASA. But another allegation from Minister Padarat is that the contract was awarded to a PNM campaign manager and sub-agent.
You see-
So does Oppostion have any affiliation to the PNM campaign team? Anyone at Oppostion was affiliated with the PNM campaign for elections?
Even if Oppostion is affiliated with the PNM, it is Oppostion's right and the right of any individual in Trinidad and Tobago to be affiliated with any political party. As we speak today, Akash, you would see a UNC campaign manager being placed as the URP coordinator. So the same Barry Padarat accusing the PNM and PNM citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as though something is wrong with it. That once you have PNM, you're not supposed to engage in legitimate contracts and what have you. Accusing the PNM of all manner of things as though something is wrong once you're a member of the PNM and that you engage in legitimate work. You can't point to anything that is illegal. You can't point to anything that were in breach of the Procurement Act. You can't point to any corruption whatsoever. But something is wrong simply because the person is a PNM. I mean, that is ridiculous. And if we have to go through the company's registry and look at directors and look at the association with any political organization, be it PNM or UNC or what have you, and then point to that as though something is wrong with it, then we are going down a very dangerous road. And if one of the directors of Oppostion is associated in any way with the PNM, that is his constitutional right. Because you can't be accusing the PNM of one thing when at the same breath you're seeing directors of state agencies being the wives and the spouses of government ministers. You can't be accusing the PNM when at the same time you are appointing campaign managers of the UNC to head NCC, to head the URP. It is blatant political hypocrisy that we should not tolerate in this country. And he's an hypocrite. And he has no moral authority to be speaking about that. Because you can't come and say, oh, he's a PNM, it's corruption or what have you. Not a scintilla of evidence. Not a scintilla of evidence. And on that point, I'm told that pre-action protocol letter is going to be served on him either today or tomorrow. Pre-action protocol letter. You understand? Because when he came to the parliament and when he was asked about it by your newspapers and another newspapers, all he's saying is that some award of contract took place before on the eve of an election, when this matter had its genesis from the start of the year, before an election was called, on a serious issue with respect to bacteria in water impacting the lives of the people of Point 14. And I am pretty certain that Minister Padarat had these documents available to him.
You mentioned the board composition there. Can I get your take on it? We saw on the composition of the state boards.
Let me tell you this. When I look at it, I wonder if we're living in Bangladesh or Delhi. That is all I can see. Because I tell you this, Akash.
You have to clarify that.
I'll tell you this. As a minister of government, in the PNM government, Dr. Nayan Gatsby Tolly could tell you the pains at which we go through as a cabinet to appoint state boards. You couldn't bring a cabinet note by Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley with only a certain race being represented. It must represent Trinidad and Tobago. That is how a PNM cabinet conducted itself. And he would ask you directly, is that board being taken from India if it only represents a particular race? Or is it a board from Ghana? And I remember Minister Imbut, as the corporation soul, would ask you, even before cabinet, is that a board from Mozambique? Because as far as the PNM is concerned, the appointment of state boards and persons and citizens who are qualified to serve on state boards, it must represent a diverse society like Trinidad and Tobago. And what we are seeing here today by the UNC government, if it doesn't trouble you, then I don't know what will going to trouble us as a society. And then you're seeing many of them being affiliated with government ministers, campaign managers, and the same people, one of them padarotting, job for the boys and job for the girls, PNM boys and PNM girls, in true Padarat style. And in the same way, job for the boys, job for the PNM boys, job for the PNM girls. Look at who are the UNC girls and the UNC boys doing the same thing. Political hypocrisy to the highest.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Gonzal I have two questions for you. One, you said that the building that was rented,
Yes.
now that you're not getting an answer from in the parliament, is there any other way that you can get the minister to
To respond?
respond to that?
Well, at the earliest opportunity, I am going, because I asked for the minister to be hauled before the privileges committee and I was not successful in doing so, then there are other avenues in the standing orders of the parliament that I can correct the record, and I plan to do so at the earliest opportunity.
Because the nation, most persons who are listening to the parliament would trust and believe that whatever a minister says is the truth. People would believe, but would want to faster believe him than you. And if we can't get the truth out of our ministers who's supposed to be giving us the truth, then we as citizens need to know how can we hold them accountable.
And that is the challenge. You have the standing orders of the parliament that were designed to ensure that when you speak there, you speak the truth and you don't abuse the privileges of parliament by making blatant lies. Because as you know, the privileges of parliament allows ministers and members of parliament to speak without legal repercussions. So it gives you a certain amount of latitude to speak. But the standing orders are designed in such a way that ministers of government and members of parliament ought not to abuse the privileges of the parliament. And when they do so, they ought to be held accountable by members of the parliament through the privileges committee. And when I discovered the lie, because I said he spoke after me, and I went and investigated, because a minister of government doesn't always know every single thing. And I assumed that when whoever would have passed that information to him, that the responsible thing that he should have done as a minister is to check the information before going to parliament and make a fool of yourself. I investigated the matter. I realized it was a blatant lie. I invoked the standing orders of the parliament so that he can be held accountable. I was not successful in so doing. And the option that was made available to me is to come before a press conference and expose his lies.
All right, so my final question to you is it that we have to now look or hold the Speaker of the House accountable for these things also?
I am not saying that at all. The Speaker of the House he is responsible for the proceedings of the House. He has discretion to exercise in accordance with the very same standing orders that I have just cited. And he is free to disagree if a request is made for a member of the House to be placed before a privileges committee. The Speaker can look at the facts and he makes a determination. It is well within his discretion so to do. And if he decides not to refer the matter, the member who misled the House, to the privileges committee, then as a responsible opposition, I am not going to keep it in the parliament. If I'm not successful in the parliament, then I am going to speak about it in the public domain. I'm going to use the platform and the opportunities that are available to me so that to ensure that you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, will know the truth. So nothing that happens in the parliament is going to prevent me from speaking. If I'm not successful in the parliament, then I'll come before the national community and present the facts. Nobody's going to muzzle the opposition.
Okay. I have a question for Dr. Dolly.
Yes.
I don't know if it's possible. You would have read out earlier on a list of things from the Ministry of Social Development that CEPEP workers who are displaced can access. What is the opposition other move of educating persons who may not have heard you just a while ago? Is the opposition going to have a caravan, a drive to educate the displaced CEPEP workers to be aware of those grants? And one other question, you list a whole lot of stuff. Could you apply for all of those stuffs, or is it just limited to just certain things that you can apply for?
Very soon, each member of the opposition, each MP is going to post that on their page. The PNM is going to post it on all of our pages as well. And every MP's office is going to have that information available. I can tell you as a member of parliament, I share that type of information also routinely via broadcast to more than 1,000 constituents at a time. So we are going to push that information out so that those who may not have heard the press conference today, and of course the press conference is going to be live on our pages as well, they would have access to the information. With regards to application, each application will be unique. And so that is why we are encouraging all of the workers to visit the offices. You must visit, you must apply, and when you apply, your circumstances will be taken into account. There's usually a home visit and so on, so that's why it is important to do it now so that the process can start. So it depends on what you are eligible for. You would be able to get the access to these grants, but you must apply. So that is why the imperative is to get the information out and ask the persons to get to the offices around the country and apply.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator, I have a question for you. You would have outlined the threshold for borrowing for the minister. Is that advice based on people looking forward to the 10%? Or is it just advice on borrowing? Because there are persons who would hear you say what you said, but the clarity of can the minister borrow this money and be able to consistently maintain that, yeah.
If he borrows let's assume that it's 10%, could be 15%, because remember it's starting at 10%.
Yeah.
The back pay alone would be about $89 billion.
Right.
And to get current would be another 200 million, and the same monetary expenditure as explained. To borrow $9 billion, okay, either domestically or internationally. It's just not there. Development loans doesn't have the headroom to do that. So that is a question you're going to have to put to the Minister of Finance, because based on his borrowing program, it cannot be accommodated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so I want to thank you very much for attending this week's press conference. We look forward to another edition next Wednesday, where we will continue to speak to the population on national issues. So thank you all very much.
Power, feel the power, power. DJ,
touch it, bring it, baby. Touch it, bring it, baby.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Somebody touch me, somebody touch me, somebody touch my soul. Yeah. Somebody pray to me, Jesus. Somebody touch my soul. Somebody touch me, somebody touch me, somebody touch my soul.
Who, me?
While I was praying, pray to me, Jesus. Somebody touch my soul.
Life too sweet, I can't complain. The only constant is the change, and we go touch the road again. So as long as you call my name, then I will answer. I'm a happy camper, and love is my sponsor. As I'm man of life, then I will dance up. No time for no anger, I'm smiling with me hands up, yeah.
Somebody touch me,